coordinator based in Auckland. I cover the South and the East areas, and I'm just delighted to welcome all of our Sweet Louise members to this webinar on nutrition. This will be presented by Auckland University Master Student in Nutrition and Dietetics, Stephanie Rozbicki, and supported by Clare Wallis, Clinical Dietitian and Teaching Fellow at the Auckland University, who heads the New Zealand Dietitian Prescribing course for students and dietitians. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment and just open our meeting with a karakia. Kia tau te rangi Māori e, o te rangi e tu iho nei, o papatua nuku e takoto nei, o te taio e awhi nei, ki runga i a tātou, tihei Māori ora. Before I hand over to Steph, just a couple of things. As you can see, the cameras are turned off during the presentation, but if we can, we will turn them on just before the end. In the meantime, please feel free to use the chat function, which is at the top of your screen, if you want to introduce yourselves and post any questions that you might have for Steph or Claire. Our lovely Amy will be monitoring the questions, and depending on time at the end, she will share these with Steph to answer. If we do run out of time, we will forward them to Steph via email, and we'll get back to you with the answers. Just so that you are aware, our meeting is being recorded today, and this will be shared on our website when it is available. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over to you, Steph.
Cool. All right, just give me a minute or two and I'll get my presentation up. I have never used Teams before, so that looks like the right one. And can we all see that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I couldn't hear anything back. So.
Oh, it's just gone off the presenter again.
Cool.
Now you're good.
Awesome. So hi everybody. My name is Steph. As Nadine's already said, I have just recently finished my Masters in Nutrition and Dietetics, and so I'm currently just in the process of waiting for everything to get marked so I can start my new job. But I'm very excited to talk to you all today. So I just thought, as I've already said, so I was at uni for 5 years, so I've spent 5 years learning about nutrition. I wouldn't call myself an expert. I've still got a lot to learn, but I hope that I can just kind of share some of my knowledge that I have with you all today. And again, if you've got any questions, please just put them in the chat. I've tried to answer as many of the questions that you all asked me beforehand. But if there's anything that I didn't address or anything that pops up, please do just ask away. Just a little bit about myself. I've put 3 words that I have basically used to sum myself up. So firstly, I've got a lot of plants. I've got more plants than the normal person ever needs in their house. I also love baking. A couple of my favorites are Belgian biscuits and chocolate cake, and I'll talk to you about baking today. And also the third one is that I love fitness. I teach group fitness classes in my spare time, and I'm at the gym all the time. So yeah, that's who I am. So we'll get started. So this is what we're going to generally cover today. Now there's a lot of stuff that we could cover, but in the sake of time, I have had to cut it down a bit. So we've got sort of general nutrition advice to begin with, and then I've got a bit of more specific information around some of the nutrients that you had questions about, and then we're going to talk about symptom management in terms of nutrition as well, and have time for some questions at the end. I just wanted to start this presentation by just saying that everyone is at a very different stage in their journey with breast cancer. And also everyone's at a very different stage in their lives. I'm sure we've got a very big range of, people might have kids at home, people might be working, have a business, be retired, etc., etc. And so not all of the information that I provide to you today might be relevant to you. But I hope that there's just at least one thing that you can take away, either something new or something that just reinforces your previous nutrition learnings, and just, provides you with a little bit of comfort or information. So firstly, I just wanted you to have a think about why eating is important to you. And for the sake of time, I won't try and get anybody to give me any participation, but just have a think about sort of why you eat generally over the day. And there's lots of different things that might come up. Sort of the bare basics. Eating is important because it gives us energy. We have coffee in the morning, we have breakfast, we have some lunch, we have some dinner. We constantly have food just to keep us going over the day. Otherwise, we'd be really tired. It also makes us feel strong. We often can find that if we haven't eaten for a while, we might get the shakes, we might just feel a bit fatigued. But also there's other sides of eating as well. There's really social sides and emotional sides of eating. Often when we catch up with people, we go for a coffee, we get a cake, we go out for dinner, we have food when we have celebrations like weddings and funerals. So it's definitely more than just putting food on a plate and eating it. There's so many other ties to it. And that's what I just kind of want you to think about throughout this presentation today is why is food important to you, and why do you enjoy eating? What foods do you not enjoy eating? And we're just gonna, talk about that a bit more. So the first part is just providing some general nutrition advice. This is also advice that you can take home and share with friends and family as well. It's general advice. So what you might have heard from previous nutrition presentations, if you've heard any before, is this quote, which is eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to try and make anybody go vegetarian today, but basically this quote is just talking about general healthy eating and general sustainable eating, which is a diet that has lots of plant-based foods and also some protein from animal sources, but just having a nice balance of food. And when we talk about balance, often people don't really know what balance means, but we've got a really nice way of explaining that. So just in terms of general healthy eating advice, the standard recommendations are having 3 main meals over the day with some snacks scattered throughout and also plenty of water. Now that can change for everybody. Some cultures, they might not eat in the morning, they might fast until lunchtime. Just people over the day generally might have work at some time, and so they don't eat as you would typically think. But this is just sort of standard. Obviously, apply it to your own lives. But then in terms of trying to think about what those 3 main meals might look like in terms of healthy eating, a nice way that we have to describe that is the healthy plate model. So this goes back to that quote about having food, not too much, and mostly plants. So when we talk about a main meal, it's not always going to look like a plate that's divided into nice little sections, but we generally recommend having about half a plate of non-starchy veggies, a quarter of a plate of carbohydrate foods, and a quarter of a plate of protein foods. Now, obviously, curries and casseroles and those sorts of foods aren't going to look like this, but it's kind of getting that general ratio of foods. That's what we're aiming for. So in terms of our veggies, that's pretty much anything that you can think of: tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, beetroot, broccoli, spinach, etc., etc., etc. These veggies are really good because they contain fiber, so that helps make us feel full and also keeps us regular in terms of our bowel motions. And it has lots of beneficial vitamins and minerals and antioxidants, which are generally good for our overall health. And a nice way that we like to think about having your veggies is by eating the rainbow. So trying to have lots of different coloured vegetables in there, because they're all going to have a slightly different nutrition composition. And so they're all going to give us slightly different vitamins and antioxidants. The next quarter is our carbohydrate foods. So these can be any of your typical carbohydrate foods like bread, pasta, rice, and there's also things like potato, kumara, taro, and green banana. So carbohydrate foods are really important. They're broken down into simple sugars, which give us energy over the day. And we generally recommend aiming for whole grain or wholemeal options where possible. So choosing things like whole grain or wholemeal bread, brown rice, whole grain pasta, as these foods are higher in fiber, which, as I mentioned before, helps keep us fuller for longer and also helps keep our bowels regular, which is really important if you do experience anything like constipation or diarrhea. And our last quarter is our protein foods. So this might be typical foods that we think about, like our meat and poultry, chicken, fish, red meats, lamb, beef, but it's also our vegetarian options, so our legumes. So that's things like lentils, chickpeas, tofu, soybeans, and these foods are really important because protein helps to keep us full for quite a long time and is really important for keeping our muscles nice and strong as well. We typically recommend trying to pick lean meats. So that's meats that don't have too much skin or fat on them, trimming those options off where possible and just trying to have less of the processed meats, as these can be a bit higher in things like salt and fat as well. And a nice way of trying to think about your portions, if you're not going to have it in a typical plate, is by using your hands. So for vegetables, it's just having 2 handfuls of vegetables, a fistful of carbohydrate food, so that is both the size and also thickness of the fist there, best way I can describe that. Fish is both the length and also the width of your hand. Things like chicken or beef or lamb or pork, that's the size and also the thickness of your palm. And snacks is generally a handful. And if you have family or friends around, you can generally see that everyone's got different sized hands because everybody's got different recommendations of how much they should have as well. So when we talk about snacks, basically the world's your oyster, you can have whatever you want. Some snack options that we sort of talk about often is things like fruit, that might be with some yogurt, things like nuts and seeds, crackers and cheese, muesli bars, boiled eggs, veggie sticks, maybe with some hummus or dip, and any of your baked goods, cakes, biscuits, muffins, whatever suits your fancy. Basically any foods that you enjoy. It's nice having a bit of a mix because just like with our main meal, different snacks are going to have slightly different compositions. They're going to give you slightly different vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and so give yourself a bit of variation, but have the snacks that you enjoy. So that's sort of our general nutrition advice. It is quite a little quick summary there, but if you do have any questions about sort of general healthy eating, then do please just fire away with those in the chat. So our second part that we're going to get onto is our specific nutrient advice. And so I've just tried to pick the main ones that you had mentioned in the questions. There is a lot more that I could talk about, but yeah, I've tried to keep it as simple as I can today for you all. So the first and I think the most important one to talk about is sugar. There is a lot of controversy when it comes to sugar and cancer. And so I just want to try and clarify that as best as I can for you today, and if I can provide some reassurance. So the common myth is that sugar feeds cancer. I want to start right off the bat and say that it does feed cancer, but it does feed every single cell in our body, and it doesn't make cancer accelerate in growth. It doesn't make it spread. So basically, the source of this myth is from PET scans. So PET scans are a way of finding cancer in the body when a CT or an MRI scan isn't either practical or isn't able to pick it up. And so what happens with a PET scan is somebody is injected with a solution which contains glucose, aka sugar, and also radioactive traces. And what this does is it goes into all of our cells in our body, and when we scan, it can find the locations of cancer cells. And so when they did this initially, what they found was that cancer cells lit up really brightly on the scan. And so they went, these cancer cells, they're taking up lots of sugar. They obviously need sugar to grow. And so they went, don't have sugar. But the reason why they lit up so brightly is actually very simple. Cancer cells are very dense. And so what it means is that they just took up more of the sugar. It isn't because it was accelerating their growth. It was purely because they were just taking up sugar because they were much, much smaller and much more clumped together. So in summary, all of the cells in our body use sugar for energy. It keeps us functioning day to day. If we don't eat sugar, our body has ways of breaking down fats and protein and using those to give us energy. And so if we are breaking down things like protein, then that can actually strip away our muscles. And so that's why it's quite important to have that sugar in the diet, just so that we're protecting our muscles while we can. So in summary, you can eat sugar if you want to. You don't have to. If you prefer not to have sugar foods, that is totally up to you. But if you are kind of having reservations about having sugar foods because you think that that might be causing your cancer to grow or spread, don't worry, because it's not doing that. Overall, trying to reduce our sugar consumption is good. Across the world, we eat far too much sugar. But that's generally in the form of processed sugar. So if you were having, lots of lollies and lots of chips and lots of chocolate and lots of baking, then we are getting quite a lot of sugar, and that can be, detrimental for our health in other ways, things like diabetes, etc. And so overall, trying to kind of cut down some of the processed foods and having those sort of natural sugars, so things like fruit and honey, etc. But overall, you can enjoy your sugar foods. If you're going out to a cafe and you want to have a piece of cake, have a piece of cake. You don't need to worry about that. Just remember that if you do decide that you either want to cut out sugar or you are cutting out sugar already, that this can have side effects like weight loss, fatigue, muscle weakness, as I said, because you might be stripping down your protein instead. And it can also decrease your mood. So if you do have any of those symptoms, then just kind of check in, have a chat with your doctor or a dietitian if you need to at any point. But yes, you can have sugar. Please don't worry about it. The second one just to chat about is soy. So there is the belief that soy might help to prevent the risk of getting or reduce the risk of getting breast cancer. And that's because soy foods contain a thing called phytoestrogens, which I'm not going to get into too much detail about, but this is a plant-based estrogen that might be able to prevent binding of hormones to cells, etc. However, some studies have shown that soy might be beneficial if you have a high consumption of soy, but this isn't found across all studies, and the definition of high consumption of soy is also extremely variable. So at the moment, there are no recommendations for having soy foods over non-soy foods. Obviously, if you like to have soy foods, please do eat them. You're more than welcome to. It's not going to harm you, but it's not necessarily going to help you more than any other food. And that might mean, having some soy alternatives in terms of your protein. So that's things like your tofu that I mentioned before, soybeans, or having some soy alternatives in terms of milks. But again, if you don't like soy products, you're not really going to miss out on anything there. So don't try and force yourself to have anything that you're not going to enjoy. And the last one that I wanted to talk about was preservatives. So the specific one that I was asked about was E250 or sodium nitrate. And this is typically found in things like processed meats. Again, evidence is very conflicting. just like soy, some studies have shown that there's an association between some food preservatives and breast cancer or other cancers. But this isn't found in all studies. And also the consumption of preservatives, there's no real definition of high versus a low consumption. And this is only an association. So this does not mean that the preservatives cause cancer. As I mentioned, it's often found in processed foods. And so, you might imagine that somebody who has a really high consumption of processed foods might also, processed meats might also have a high consumption of other processed foods, which in general is typically not as good for our health as whole fresh foods. So the general recommendation is our general nutrition advice, so trying to have lean meats and trying to have fresh meats, as these also just have less salt and fat in them. But if you do want to have some processed meat like some ham or some sausages or some bacon or corned beef, etc., then you can also have this every now and again, and it is also going to be completely fine, and it's not going to harm your cancer in any way. And I just very briefly wanted to mention supplements. So there's a lot that I could go into about supplements, but I just didn't really want to touch on that too much today because it is quite a tricky topic. So generally, if you're able to eat enough food and you're able to eat a wide variety of food, then the chances of you needing a supplement are unlikely because we're able to get everything that we need out of our food. Generally, if we do have supplements, they're in a much higher dosage than what we actually need, and our body just gets rid of anything that we don't need. But if you do have any concerns about how much food that you're able to eat, or if you're really struggling with trying to have, a wide variety of foods, then I would discuss this with either your doctor or a dietitian, and they can provide you some advice on whether they would suggest a supplement or other nutrition options that might be available to you if you are struggling to eat. And so we're whizzing through this presentation. The last part that I just wanted to talk about was symptom management. So this will vary depending on, where you currently are at with your journey. Everybody will have different symptoms at different stages. If you're having treatment, you're going to have different symptoms to somebody who's not having any treatment. If you're having medication, you're going to have different symptoms to somebody who's not having medication. So again, just take whatever you need out of this. Yeah, it's also just good general eating advice as well. So when we're sick, it can affect our eating. We might have a reduced or an increased appetite. We might find that there's differences in our weight, differences in our energy levels. Typically what we would see is a decrease in energy levels. It can affect our mood, and then we might have some side effects like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. In terms of common cancer-related symptoms, these are typically things like poor appetite, nausea, weight changes. So this might be weight loss or weight gain, depending on things like chemotherapy, radiotherapy, cancer cachexia, taste changes, and fatigue. So I think we should be able to touch on all of these today. So firstly, we're just going to start with poor appetite. So poor appetite can be a result of cancer growth or cancer treatment. Often when we've got a poor appetite, and you've probably found this in your own life as well, sometimes you just don't know what the cause is. You just don't feel hungry and you just don't feel like eating. But something like anorexia is a bit more severe. So that's when we have poor appetite and it doesn't really ever go away, and it results in us not wanting to eat and therefore losing a lot of weight and muscle. Things like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, some medications, as I mentioned, and treatments, even things like low mood, depression, fatigue, and the cancer itself can also reduce our appetite. But there are lots of things that we can do nutritionally to try and help make sure that you can get enough food, even if you do have a poor appetite. So having small amounts of food often is a really good way to try and make sure that you've still got your food intake up nice and high. So when I said before that we typically have, 3 main meals, some snacks during the day, when we've got a poor appetite, it might be good to try and split our food up into 6 or 7 small snacks across the day. So not trying to dump a giant plate of food in front of us and see how much we can eat, but just having small chunks of food scattered throughout the day, so that when we're eating, we're not trying to force ourselves to eat too much, and we're just having those snacks that we enjoy. As I said, having a bit of a variety, fruits, nuts, baking, crackers and cheese. So we're still trying to get some of our vegetables, some of our carbohydrates, and some of our protein, but just scattering it out. If you've got a really poor appetite, just having some food that you like might help make sure that you can just keep that intake up. Don't try and force yourself to have anything that you're not going to enjoy, because then that's going to make it really hard to try and finish it if we are only having a small amount at one time. You might have been told when you were a child, because I definitely was, not to watch TV while you're eating, because often what happens is we eat much more than we normally would because we're distracted. This might actually be quite a good thing if you do have a poor appetite. So distraction for you, it might be watching a video, it might be watching some TV, it might be having dinner with other people and having a chat, it might be doing some work, whatever it is. That can be quite a good technique to try and make sure that you're still eating in kind of in a mindless way until all your food's gone and you just haven't even noticed it. The other important thing is to remove food rules. So these are things like, you can't have cake for breakfast, can't have ice cream for breakfast, you can't have cereal for dinner. If you've got a poor appetite and you feel like eating ice cream for breakfast, just eat it. What's it going to do? Absolutely nothing. It's still perfectly fine for you to have that food whenever you feel like it. So again, it's that kind of thing of eating what's appealing. Don't worry about eating ice cream for breakfast. If it means that you can eat something, then that's definitely preferable. If you do find yourself sort of out and about during the day, try have some snacks on you, chuck them in your pocket, chuck it in your bag, put it in the car. It just means that if you do have little spots during the day that you are actually feeling a bit hungry, that you have got something there, and it just will help overall increase your intake. And having things like fluid foods, so things like smoothies or nutrition supplements, can also be a good option as well if you just aren't able to kind of chew and eat enough. In terms of making a smoothie, so you will have this available to you afterwards, so you can always come back and have a look at this slide. But what we try and do is increase the amount of calories if you're not able to eat as much overall. So this is having things like full fat milk, and adding in cream, adding in full fat yogurt, full fat ice cream, or having dairy alternatives, but still trying to increase your fat intake. So having things like coconut cream or putting in some avocado, that will all help to just increase the amount that you're able to get out of that smoothie. And in terms of flavoring, add whatever you like, depending if you're, wanting to have sort of multiple smoothies across the day, it might be having some slightly different flavors. Obviously you can do, what we would typically think of and add lots of different fruits in there. You could add some peanut butter in there. That's got some protein in there and some fat as well. So that will help, keep your muscles nice and strong too. You might add things like fruit juices or coffee powder or milkshake flavorings. You might add things like Wheat Bix blended up in there. There's lots of different options, and generally what you might find is, if you put 2 Wheat Bix in front of you, you might think that's too much and I can't eat that. But if you blend it up and put it in a smoothie, you actually can drink quite a lot faster, and it makes it a little bit easier because you can have it nice and cold, and that might be a little bit more desirable than trying to sit down and force yourself to have a meal. The other thing to consider when you do have a poor appetite is the saying, make every mouthful count. So again, if you're not able to eat very much, it's about making the most out of the foods that you do eat. So that might be adding things like butter, margarine, oil, cream into, cereal, cheese onto lasagnas, spaghetti, anything that sounds nice with cheese, pretty much anything's good with cheese, adding sour cream and cream cheeses to food, trying to swap low fat for full fat options. Now that might be hard if you typically have always picked low fat because they are generally considered better for our health. But if you are struggling to eat, getting those extra few calories from the full fat options is really important and will be really beneficial for you. You can always swap to low fat again once you get your appetite back, but if you enjoy the taste of full fat, then that's a good way to get those calories up. And also you can have healthy fats like avocados, those found in nuts and seeds. A really simple way of increasing the amount that you're eating is having sauces and dips and spreads, because they don't add very much onto a meal, but they will get some extra energy in there. And again, having those sugary baked goods, you are welcome to help yourselves to those, or things like chocolate or chips, because those often have some good amounts of energy in them as well. So the second symptom that we're just going to talk about is nausea. So that's the feeling of being sick. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're vomiting, but vomiting may be a result of nausea. So that could be caused from cancer treatments, the cancer itself, or from medications. And your doctor might prescribe you medications to help with your nausea. And so if they do, it's definitely worth giving them a go. Obviously, if you've got any side effects, do let them know. But that is a really good first step to try and get rid of that nausea. In terms of nutritionally, when you are feeling not very well, a lot of the same advice sort of applies for nausea as it does for a poor appetite. So again, it's having small frequent snacks across the day. If a really large meal feels too big, don't try and have a big meal, just try and have those small frequent snacks. Trying to pick fresh snack options might be better than having processed options, because often things that are really salty and fatty can actually make us feel quite sick as well. I know if I have a McDonald's meal, I'm never going to feel as good as if I actually made a burger that I had at home. So yeah, trying to pick those fresh options. Different to the poor appetite one, picking low-fat options might actually help, as I mentioned, because some fatty foods can actually increase feelings of being sick. But a really important thing to do is when you are feeling unwell is not to stop eating, because if we do have an empty stomach, that can actually sometimes make the nausea worse. So trying to just have small amounts of food over the day, and having plenty of fluids as well. So that might be water, or any drink that you enjoy having. Some people find that, things like ginger beer or ginger ale might help, or just having things like fizzy drinks or juices or anything that's going to help you get those fluids in, because if you do have any vomiting as a result of the nausea, then we can get a bit dehydrated, and so it's important just to try and keep some fluids in us as well. If you do have any vomiting, then having salty foods like salty soups or potato chips can also help, because that replaces some of the salt that we lose when we vomit as well. And sucking on ice, peppermints or barley sugars as well can help. It just gives us a little bit of moisture in our mouth, and overall it might just be a nice feeling. So the third one is unintentional weight changes. So this will be completely dependent on where you're at with your journey, where you're at with your life. As we get older, we tend to put a little bit of weight on. When we're in lockdown, we tend to put a little bit of weight on, so hugely dependent. But unintentional weight change is weight that we didn't mean to either gain or lose. So that might be a side effect of cancer or cancer treatment. So if you have weight loss, the same advice sort of applies for poor appetite. So trying to have, small frequent snacks and trying to make every mouthful count. If you have weight gain, just remember that some weight gain may be unavoidable. If you're having chemotherapy or radiotherapy, generally, a bit of weight gain is expected. In terms of eating, if you're kind of concerned about your weight and your doctor or dietitian might have, suggested losing some weight, or you yourself want to lose some weight, then just have a think about the plate model, thinking about your portions, thinking about that sort of 3 main meals and a few snacks across the day, and which options you might pick for snacks in terms of trying to pick less processed ones. But just remember that some weight gain may actually be beneficial, because as you get to more advanced stages in your advanced breast cancer journey, then you may, or some of you may already find that you're starting to get to the stage of cancer cachexia. And if you do actually have a little bit of extra weight on you, that can be quite beneficial when you get to that stage. So cancer cachexia is weight loss caused by your cancer progressing, and it breaks down protein and it causes you to get quite weak muscles and to have unintentional weight loss. It will happen regardless of how much you exercise, and it will happen regardless of how much food that you can eat, and it is ongoing, but it is also painless. In terms of cachexia, there isn't really much that we can suggest, and medically there's not a lot that can be done to prevent cachexia. Simply eating more won't stop the process from beginning. And so when you do get to this stage, it can be really beneficial just to talk to friends, family, or health professionals just to help you through this stage in your journey. Briefly just going to touch on taste changes. So like all other symptoms, some treatments and medications can alter the receptors in our nose and mouth and send different signals as to what we're tasting. So in particular, some foods may taste more bitter, metallic, or rancid than they would typically taste. Or things like sweet foods may become unbearably sweet. And this is a very common symptom when you are having treatment. So some things that may help with that are things like practicing regular mouth washing, so trying to clean your mouth out, have it as clean as possible. Again, having lots of fluids. It might be things like, making sure that you're brushing your teeth, brushing your gums, or there's also washes that you can do with like baking soda. I think it's baking soda. Claire can clarify at the end if I'm wrong with that one. But yeah, trying to keep your mouth nice and clean. Again, avoid any foods that aren't enjoyable. If something is tasting really metallic, or if a sweet thing is just tasting really sweet, just don't eat it. You will hopefully find that your taste will go back to normal after you've finished with your treatment. So don't force yourself to have any of those foods that you're not enjoying. And if you do have taste changes, try different foods than you would normally eat, because you might find that you actually enjoy those rather than the foods that you would normally have that might be starting to taste bad. If the issue is that when you're preparing food, it's quite off-putting because of the smell, kindly ask a friend or family to prepare food for you, to cook food for you. If somebody offers to cook you something, as much as we often like to be like, no, I'll do it myself, maybe, 1 or 2 times, just let them do it for you, because that might mean that when you actually sit down to eat, the food is more appealing to you. Having cold foods might help. Often hot foods can have a bit more of a smell and have a bit more of a taste. Having fresh foods is a common recommendation all throughout this presentation. And if you do have metallic tastes, sometimes using like plastic or bamboo or any non-metallic utensils can help as well. And the last one is fatigue. So tiredness can occur as, again, side effects of medication or treatment, or if you've got something like weight loss or poor appetite, it also might be because you have less nutrients available in your body to use for energy. As I mentioned, if you're cutting sugar out of your diet, if you have less sugar in your body, then your cells can't use that for energy, and so again, that might cause that tiredness. Tiredness can affect our mood, our social interactions, and our ability just to function day to day as well, which is definitely something that we want to avoid. In terms of trying to eat when you are suffering from fatigue, it can be quite good to try and have a nap before meal times. Going into your meal feeling nice and energized might mean that you can actually eat a little bit more than if you were trying to force yourself to eat while you were actually feeling very tired. and try and make your energy times your big meal times. So if you have had a really good sleep overnight and you're feeling really energized in the morning, it might be a good idea to try and have quite a big breakfast, because if you get into sort of lunchtime, dinner time, and that's the time when you're feeling a bit more tired, then it might be good just to try and have a bit of a smaller meal and not force yourself to have too much food. As I mentioned before, try and not cut out any food groups such as sugar. Try and keep that nice variety of foods in there. Prepare meals when you have energy. So this might be, again, if you've had a good sleep overnight, once you've finished your breakfast, you might just try and make foods in advance for your dinners. Try and do a few days at a time. Or again, if you've got friends or family who offer to make any meals for you, then this can be quite good just to put in the freezer so that when you are feeling really tired, you don't have to worry about cooking. Doing something as simple as buying your groceries online can help. If physically going to the supermarket and trying to pick foods and shop for foods is really exhausting, then just being able to sit at home and add everything to a shopping list might help as well, so that when you have got the rest of the day, when you're actually trying to have your food, you've got that energy. Eating with others might help provide a bit of energy, and the same as if you've got a poor appetite, just bring some snacks with you when you're out and about. If you're starting to feel a bit tired, you actually might find that having something on the go might give you a little bit more energy while you're out. So this is actually my second to last slide, so we've whizzed through it, but we did have a few questions around different diets when you have got advanced breast cancer. And so I just very briefly wanted to touch on this. So there was questions about the keto diet, intermittent fasting, but there's also other diets out there like paleo and the Mediterranean diet. So the main thing is, if we analyze all those diets back down to their bare roots of what they're trying to suggest, most diets promote the consumption of whole foods, of fresh foods, of non-processed or less processed foods, and they all just have a different kind of focus on what the key nutrients are. So keto typically has more of the fats, Mediterranean often has more of the plants, paleo what we find out in nature. So overall, what these diets are generally saying is eat foods, not too much, and mostly plants. So it is just general healthy eating advice. If you do have any sort of questions about diets in particular, please do either fire those away or go and speak to a dietitian if you are interested in doing any of these diets. But the main thing is that if you're able to have lots of different types of food, if you're able to have a balance of, protein from animal and non-animal sources, if you're having a rainbow of vegetables, and if you're having lots of different types of carbohydrates, trying to incorporate some of those whole grain ones, then you don't really need to worry too much about diets. The one thing that I did want to comment on was around the intermittent fasting. So if you are struggling in terms of trying to meet your overall energy or food intake, if you're struggling with things like poor appetite, if you're struggling with things like nausea or weight loss, then fasting typically isn't recommended, because overall it can decrease our food intake. Not in all cases, but in some cases. And so you don't want to cause yourself to get fatigued, to have muscle wastage, or to have more weight loss by doing intermittent fasting. Obviously, if it's a personal, cultural belief that you want to do your intermittent fasting, then I would definitely talk to a doctor or a dietitian around intermittent fasting, and just make sure that you are going to have enough to sustain you and not have any of those symptoms. But again, yeah, in terms of diets, just try and not get too caught up on all the information that's out there. There are lots of blogs and lots of articles that I'm sure you've seen of women that have breast cancer who've tried all these different diets, and they might say that one diet's amazing for this reason, and then someone else will say this diet's amazing for this reason. But generally, all in all, general healthy eating is recommended. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening and for having me. If you do have any questions, I hope that I can answer them, but if I can't, Clare is also available as well. And if you do have any questions that might pop up in the next day or two, as often they do, then please do feel free to send those through, and they can get emailed to me, and I'll answer them as best as I can.
Wow. Yes. Thank you so much. I feel like you've addressed almost everything that our members put to you, which is amazing. Thank you for a very, very thorough presentation. I think there's a couple of questions that might have popped up on the chat. Amy, do you have those questions for Steph? I'm not sure if she's on mute. Sorry. There was a question about MSG from Carolina. What are your thoughts about MSG?
That might be a question for Clare, I think.
Oh, jeez. Steph, sorry. Yeah, so MSG is a hard one because there has been, there's kind of a common theme around MSG, and there's been a common feeling that maybe there's something to that. Some people do get some reaction to MSG, so some people will have, quite a number of symptoms if they have MSG, and can have quite severe reactions. And so I think that's led to some caution around that. However, the research that's been done has found that most people don't react to MSG, and it is safe. I think there's a lot of, because of this reaction, there's been a move to reduce MSG in foods. It's actually used as a flavour enhancer, so it sort of heightens the flavour of foods. So yeah, I think it's being used less and less now, although in some highly processed foods it still will be quite prevalent. So I guess following Jess's advice that she's covered of eating less processed foods, then you'll just automatically reduce your MSG intake. So relatively safe. Some people will have reaction, and if they do, then that would be a good thing to avoid for those individuals.
Thank you. Amy, is there another question?
Yes, I'd just like to say a big thank you to you, Steph. It was very thorough and informative. Thank you. We do have another question here. Is avoiding nightshade vegetables if you have arthritis, or is that a fallacy?
Oh, that also might be a question for Clare.
Right, I've done some quick Googling, Steph. I saw the question come through, so I did a quick Google just to make sure what I thought I knew was true.
Cool.
So I am cheating a little bit. So nightshade vegetables do contain solanine, I think it's called, which is basically a chemical that for some people may aggravate arthritis or pain. However, there's a bit of, again, there's not clear evidence on this, and it may be a fallacy. What the recommendation is that if certain people feel that their symptoms are triggered from eating those kind of foods, then they should avoid them. So it's purely, again, sorry, I'm being a bit of a broken record, but it's purely an individual thing, and often that's the case with nutrition, is that some people will have a reaction, and therefore it is a good idea to avoid them. However, if you haven't really experienced that, then I would just continue to eat them, because they're a good source of fibre and vitamins and minerals.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got one more question here, and then I think Anita might have a question. So the question is, my challenge is being on a few medications that cause weight gain. I'm eating pretty healthy. Any way to counteract this?
I'll share my thoughts, and then Claire, you can jump in with anything else. So yeah, side effects of medications can be really difficult. If weight gain is a side effect of the medication, there isn't really generally a whole lot that can be done. Whether it's causing weight gain because it's making you have an increased appetite, or it might just be that it's changing things within your body that you can't control because of the medication. So yeah, as I kind of mentioned before, it's just trying to kind of think about what you're eating. So looking at the healthy plate model, looking at your eating across the day, do you think that you're eating more than normal, or do you think that you're eating the same amount and you're still gaining weight? If you think that you might be having more than normal, then it's doing those things like, having that half a plate of veggies, and quarter, trying to look at your low fat, less sugar, less salt options in terms of, you know, if you're buying anything like sauces or milk, etc. Trying to cut down on the processed foods. But yeah, often weight is a side effect, and there isn't too much that we can do except for just watching kind of how much we're eating. And Claire, would you add anything onto that?
No, I think you've covered it well. I agree. I think if you're eating pretty healthy, just keep doing the best you can. Sometimes the weight gain is because we crave foods, and so it's trying to select the healthier options if you can. So, you know, trying to go for sort of more of a vegetable-based or fruit-based perhaps snack, but sometimes it just happens. And if you're really craving that chocolate, just try and have a small bit and really enjoy it, rather than depriving yourself, because all you'll think about is that chocolate for the rest of the day if you do deprive yourself, you know, for it. So trying to find that balance, but it sounds like, you know, if you're eating pretty healthy, you're on the right track.
There was a question from a member, and I saw her pop up, but I don't see her now. Anita, if you're there, do you have your question?
Yeah. I had a question. Thank you. I have a question on carrot juice. Like it's been recommended by even Cancer Society and all, and a lot of people who have had cancer, they say have carrot juice, put a little bit of ginger, and so when you put it in juice, a lot of the fiber, I think, goes away. Just very little. You've got to put 3-4 carrots to make a glass of juice. So is it better to make it in a smoothie or something like that, or have a juice, carrot juice, and is it important to have it daily?
I'm going to provide a very brief answer, but I'm going to let Claire do most of that. So yeah, as you mentioned, often when we do have foods in like their whole form, so having a whole carrot, then our body has a little bit more time to sort of extract nutrients, get fiber out of it because we're breaking it down. When we have it in a fluid form, like in a carrot juice, it can pass through a lot quicker and we can get a little bit less out of it. And in terms of the ginger, were you mentioning, is that like for nausea, or is that?
I think it's considered, ginger is considered, what do you call it? Not an antioxidant maybe. What are they? You know, these things, herbs and certain things like turmeric and ginger. Yeah, they just a little bit. That's all.
Yeah.
Fresh.
Yeah, I guess I'll say before I pass on to Claire, I mean, if you're enjoying having it, then continue to have it because you're still going to get nutrients out of it. If you're having it because you feel like you should be having it, but you're not enjoying it so much, then that's when I would say, you know, you don't need to have it. It's kind of a bit more of a personal choice. Claire, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I think you've covered it well. I think juicing is a bit of a trend, and it comes and goes. And you know, definitely there's a place for juicing, like Steph said, the smoothie idea. You know, if you're struggling with eating, then drinking things can be helpful. However, I'd agree that perhaps eating some carrot, or eating an orange if you wanted to go to fruits, you know, is actually sometimes better because you get that whole food, and like you mentioned, Anita, the fiber, which is also really valuable from that food. So if, like Steph says, if you're enjoying it, go for it. If it's not something you're really enjoying that much, then I would just continue to eat the foods that you enjoy. It's
Yeah,
not
no, I actually enjoy it. I really like it. It's just that the worst part is cleaning out the juicer.
Yeah, 100%. Carrot really stains, doesn't it? Yeah, and I think the thing is that if you have excess, you know, nutrients that you don't need, like Steph said, you'll just, you know, excrete them. I perhaps wouldn't have it every day, but I don't think it's going to be harmful to have every day. If you're enjoying some, then go for it. Yeah.
Okay,
Wonderful.
thanks. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anita. And our last question of the day is, what are your thoughts on margarine versus butter?
So, generally the discussion around that is that butter is typically higher in like saturated fat or what we would consider, you know, bad fat, compared to margarine. And so if you are kind of tossing up between the two of them, then you might want to go for margarine over butter. It also depends, what one is your personal preference. If you really enjoy butter, obviously go for that. It depends how much you're having over the day as well. Generally, people don't have too much butter, but yeah, that's the kind of general idea. Obviously, if you've got any concerns around things like cholesterol, then that might be something that you want to consider just in terms of trying to decrease that fat intake. Again, if you are having any kind of concerns around that, then having a chat to your dietitian about that would be a good option. But yeah, that's kind of the discussion around butter and around margarine. It's just the different types of fat that's predominantly in them. And so if we had people that were sort of more concerned about their cholesterol, or they were really concerned about overall healthy eating, then we might recommend margarine. But again, yeah, if you're not eating heaps of butter or heaps of margarine, then just pick whatever one's your favorite.
Wonderful, thank you. That's all we've got.
And I think that wraps us up quite nicely. Thank you, Steph and Claire, both of you, for this amazing opportunity to share your knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate your support and your time today. We're going to close the session now. We hope you've all enjoyed it and found it of interest to you. If you do happen to have any more questions, please feel free to send them through to us, your support coordinators, and we can forward them to Steph and Claire and get back to you. And lastly, just a heads up, our next webinar will be in May on mindfulness. So hopefully we will see you then. Take care and kia ora. Thank you.